sure that everybody can hear me. So looks like we've got quite a few people on the line with me live, so thank you so much for being here. If you are here with me right now and have access to your computer, I would love to make sure that you can hear me and that you can see the content, okay? Beautiful. I already see people typing. So you're either about to tell me you can hear me. Wonderful. Thank you. Or I was going to say you're going to tell me that my mouth is moving and you can't hear anything, which I don't know, I guess could be a good thing sometimes. So wonderful to see you. I'm going to just blow this up a little bit better on my screen. So I see Katerina. Thank you. Lisa. Wonderful to see you. Sammy, Michelle, Barbara, thank you. Thank you. More people typing. Susan, and I see Krista, Beth, Kate, Lori. Awesome. So many wonderful, familiar faces, familiar names here with me live. So thank you so much. Awesome. Okay. Well, here's the thing. If you know me at all, you know I like to start on time because I know how important time is as one of our resources. I also know how important energy is. So I would love to just give you a little nudge from my computer to yours if you're in a space where you can make any adjustments to be more present, whether it's turning off, don't turn off your wireless, but turn off any notifications, close a door if you can, put on some headphones if you can, close any other windows that might be open on your screen. Anything you can do to really be present with me would be amazing, because you are going to get out of this based on the energy that you bring to the time that we have together. So it would be awesome if you were here. So thank you everyone for checking in with me. What a great turnout that we have. Really excited to do this session with you all. And let me just give you a little bit of a framework for my intention for our time today. My goal is to have a discussion for about 20 minutes or so about today's topic, which is definitely one of my favorites. We're going to talk about stress sensitivity, which is actually something I'm doing ongoing research with. So I want to share with you what we're discovering, what we're learning, and also get some of your input for those of you who are here and interested in this topic, obviously. So we'll talk a little bit about that. I also wanted to give you some very specific training techniques that are helpful if you are sensitive, if you're dealing with any anxiety or maybe depression or other brain imbalances, or if you're working with other people who might be struggling with sensitivity. So it's a short period of time to try to get across a lot of information, but I really do want to give you some sort of takeaway that you can implement right away. So I'll do the best I can to share with you what's been really helpful for me, as well as to give you some other ongoing resources of ways that you can get more connected with a community that's working on using stress sensitivity as a strength instead of dealing with what often feels like a shadow side that's following us around all the time. So for those of you who are here with me live, I would love to see how many of you, if you're willing to share, actually already know that you are a sensitive person. And as you're doing that, let me tell you that there are some different definitions of sensitivity. So I want to let you know my perspective on that. Probably the most familiar is what we know as the highly sensitive person trait. And this is a genetic trait that has really been discussed and described through the work of Elaine Aron, the HSP temperament trait. So a lot of you have looked into this. Deborah, in caps. I love that your name's in caps too, and you said you're off the charts. Yeah, I am too. So we've got some people. Ina says somewhat. Braun says yes. Hi, Braun. Lovely to see you across the pond over there in Australia. Definitely, definitely, definitely. Some people, Lisa assessment was slightly on the sensitive side, which, knowing you as I do, doesn't surprise me, and I also find it so fascinating. So many of you are here because you already know you're highly sensitive, and maybe you've taken the HSP quiz. We also have this available for research purposes. I've been using it to test, so let me give you the link here if you don't already have it. I have a bit.ly link, so it's HSP Assess. ESS, I think that's right. So you can take that there if you'd like to and get a score of your high sensitivity. We also know that there is a spectrum there. So about 20% of the population does score in the highly sensitive temperament. We also know that this is a genetic trait. And ongoing research is really exciting in understanding how this affects our relationship with our environment and how ultimately that can shape our perspective of stress. So Krista, sorry to hear that the link didn't work when you tried it before. Hopefully it will now, and certainly if you have challenges with that, you can send me an email as well. Let me go ahead and give you that now. Heidi@HeidiHanna.com, just in case there are questions or things that come up that don't get answered in our time together. As you can probably sense, if you're sensitive, you already feel me pushing a little bit to try to get through all of this content. So I'm jumping right into it. So here's the HSP temperament trait. A lot of people will ask me if this is the same thing as being an empath, and it actually is different, although there are some similarities and some potential connections. So there's some great resources out there, and I can share them with you at the end of this on understanding the differences between being an empath and sensitivity. But the easiest thing that I can come up with to explain this is the HSP temperament trait, or what we call sensory processing sensitivity, is really related to our nervous system and how we pick up subtle cues in our environment. For a long time, I thought about this as being stress sensitivity, but as I'm going to explain to you in a couple minutes, there's a little bit of a difference that's very, very important to understand. So a little bit more about the science. There's now research looking at what's called vantage sensitivity or plasticity, and seeing this genetic expression as a benefit, so that about 20% of the population is very sensitive to environmental cues that could be letting us know that there's some sort of danger or threat. And so if you look at how the brain is organized, there are 3 rules of the brain that I always like for people to understand. First is that we are hardwired for safety at all costs. So our fear circuits process faster and more intensely. With sensitive people, we actually see in fMRI scans that depth of processing is more than with the non-sensitive population. I always feel weird saying sensitive, by the way, because if you're not scoring high on the HSP scale, that doesn't mean that you're not a nice or emotionally intelligent, kind person. But this is, I want to go back to this idea of a nervous system sensitivity that really seems to be hardwired at birth. So some of the questions I'll ask people to kind of discover quickly if they're sensitive are you sensitive to bright lights, loud noises, maybe obnoxious smells in your environment? Those could be on the negative, but you could also find yourself really enjoying the arts, the music, getting moved emotionally more. Sensitive people tend to have a real need for connection with meaning and purpose, tend to think about things and process things differently. And so for parents who may be thinking that their children are sensitive, I think this is a really critical thing to understand, is that this isn't a weakness or a flaw. This is an adaptability that's really hardwired into our being. And there's a lot of different factors that contribute to this. So I'm going to show you a quick video. I'm hoping that you can see this. This is actually a clip from a movie called Sensitive that I want to recommend that you all check out. And you can go to Sensitive the movie to watch this, but just watch this little clip. I'm going to turn off my video here so that hopefully you can just focus on this video link. Actually, you know what? I'll leave it going. Let's take a look at this video.
Our observation, our theory and belief about these highly reactive, biologically susceptible children is that susceptibility grows out of a combination of genetic and environmental influences. We believe, for a variety of reasons that are grounded in solid science now, that children, even in the womb, even in prenatal life, are sensing things about the environment in which they're going to be born, and are adjusting, moving up and down their responsivity to various characteristics of the environment based on that anticipation.
Okay, so sorry about that delay. I was actually worried if I muted that you wouldn't hear the audio at all. Hopefully you heard that. It's just a little clip, but essentially they're looking at the research and noticing that there's this genetic factor as well as these environmental cues in early life experiences that contribute to that. So some of the genetic research right now is looking at these variations in the neurotransmitters, which I find fascinating because the ones that seem to be most correlated are serotonin and dopamine, which really affect our feelings, our emotion state, and even our motivation. And so it's important, I think, for somebody who has this genetic variation and knows that they're highly sensitive when it comes to processing sensory cues and information, that you realize that there is this adaptability in the brain. But super, super important to also know that this isn't always to the negative. So if you're overstimulated or trying to process too much information at one time, there's a real shadow side to that. But if you're using those subtle cues to your advantage, it actually becomes a strength that you can tap into. So I've found things like aromatherapy or music or other visualizations, meditations, because I'm sensitive, I can actually go deeper into that experience as long as I'm not getting hijacked and distracted by the noise or the negative sensory cues in the environment. So essentially what people are kind of hypothesizing at this point is that this is a survival-based situation that allows a certain portion of the population to pick up these subtle cues quickly and then be able to help the adaptability of the species. So even within families, they're saying that it's common to have one highly sensitive child and one non-sensitive child, because as you can imagine, if you're in a situation and you need someone to pick up those cues, that's great, that will help survival. But if you're in a stressful situation, it can become overstimulating, and actually the non-sensitive person is going to be more resilient in those cases. So really interesting to kind of think about all of that. This is one of the most important components, I think, in the research, and that is that highly sensitive children who are brought up in stable environments, and that can mean a lot of different things, but I would suggest that it's really the perception of the individual, of the child going through the experience. If they perceive their environment as safe and stable, they actually have less risk or lower rates of anxiety and depression and substance abuse and other brain imbalance conditions than non-sensitive. High sensitive children in unstable, stressful environments actually have higher levels of these brain imbalances. And so a lot of that comes down to that combination of sensory sensitivity picking up negative cues and hardwiring those into what we call negative affect or negativity bias. So in this idea of stress sensitivity, which I believe that the majority of people, and I'm doing research on this, so this is just my whim of an idea, I believe that most people that struggle with anxiety, chronic anxiety that is not caused by a big T trauma. So it's more of what we would consider developmental trauma. So it could be lack of attachments in childhood, living with an alcoholic parent, living with a rageaholic parent, any sort of instability that's being picked up by the sensitive brain now starts to create this stress sensitivity that perceives negative or responds or reacts to stress or stimulation even deeper. And this is what starts to cause this embodiment of anxiety. This is what, for me, has been a lifelong struggle. It's why I teach this. It's why I research stress. It's not even so much about stress per se, but it's the relationship that we all have with the stress of our lives. And that is not a cookie cutter situation. That's based on three factors. It's based on our stress load, which is the gap between demand and capacity that creates some sort of pressure. It's based on our stress lens, which is what we're talking about here. And if we have a stress sensitivity, we get hijacked more easily by those potential threats in our environment. And then our stress signature, which is how stress manifests in each of us individually. So everyone has a very different relationship with stress, which is why the Stress 360 assessment that I've created is designed to help pull this information out of each individual to then customize stress solutions, because we really don't have a one-size-fits-all approach to stress management. Now, I'm going to suggest that stress management is a really bad idea, that a lot of the problems we have with stress are because we try to minimize or manage it away instead of actually using it and mastering it. My idea around stress mastery is that we lean into it. So even as a sensitive person, if you know you have that, you're getting awesome energy and information that can be used to fuel adaptation. And in fact, as a sensitive person, you're more highly adaptable if you're giving the right cues. And that becomes really important in how you train your brain and reprogram your nervous system to use those cues more effectively. I hope I'm not getting too far ahead of myself. So let me stop for a second. For those of you who are here with me live, can you just let me know, are you following? Does this make sense? Are there questions right now before I get to some of the more specifics around the highly sensitive person and how that shows up? We have one question from Deanne who says you arrived late due to a meeting. No problem. Yes, we are recording, and I will post this for you to be able to watch later. So Lexi says piece of cake. Awesome. Pip says totally making sense. Hi, Kevin. Good to see you. Got here late. No problem. How could we use it to our advantage? Tiffany, my favorite question. Okay, so we're going to get there. Let me give you a couple other really important things to understand about sensitivity. And this comes from Elaine Aron's research. So I do want to definitely highlight her. There are amazing resources on her website, hsperson.com. I have the Highly Sensitive Persons Workbook, and we're actually going to be using some of that in our one-day challenge for sensitive people, which is starting in February, but we will be running those ongoing. So great research. So Elaine talks about 4 different kind of characteristics or experiences that you may have as a sensitive person, and she uses the DOES to help us organize that. The first is depth of processing. So I've mentioned if you look at the brain and you actually look at fMRI studies, you're going to see that a highly sensitive person is going to process subtle cues in their environment deeper into whether it's the fear center or the reward center, but there's just a higher activation of those sensory cues. So she calls that depth of processing. Overstimulation. So unfortunately, as a sensitive person, especially in a very stimulating environment that we live in today, we can get overstimulated very easily. This is what I believe leads us to that anxiety. It is not anxiety because we're thinking about things that are logical that we're worried about, but an embodied anxiety that we feel in our body. So for a long time, I've tried to explain, whether it's medical professionals or people I'm in relationships with or friends or family, when I'm anxious, I'm not making sense. I mean, it's not just change your mindset. Trust me, I've practiced the power of positivity. I do mindfulness. I do physical exercise, nutrition, I've done all of it. And yet my system stayed anxious because it is an embodiment of processing these sensory cues and getting overwhelmed and overstimulated to the point where I honestly just want all of it to go away. And so that's caused a lot of frustration and a lot of pain in my life. Understanding this now helps me, and hopefully will help you if you're a sensitive person or people you're trying to support in this, understand that we need to really manage our boundaries around our time and energy. So that's going to be one of the key takeaways of how to navigate this. So I'm going to continue here and then I come back to that question. So let me get through these fairly quickly. E is empathy or emotion. So I did mention that the idea of being an empath is different than a highly sensitive person, but those people with sensory sensitivity tend to experience more empathy. We tend to pick up on other people's emotions. We also tend to be more emotional, maybe cry a little bit more easily. And unfortunately, I think this is one of the cues that with our parenting can really go awry. I was deeply teased by my own family who didn't understand what was going on for being too sensitive. I was always crying at every movie. It didn't even matter if it was happy or if it was sad, I was crying. And my parents would tease me, we were always the last ones in the theater as I was collecting myself. And, I could go on and on with these stories that are never of malicious intent. But the sensitive person getting that teasing tries to control that more. When we're feeling anxious and we're told that there's nothing to worry about, we compartmentalize that more. We continue to embody those experiences until we actually disembody, which means we disconnect from our body. And so our mind's trying to do one thing, our body's feeling something else, and it just feels like a total hijack. Last thing is subtle cues. So the idea of an empath is that they actually pick up and experience someone else's emotional state directly. And this is the one kind of simple way to differentiate the two that I've learned. The sensitive person is not experiencing someone else's direct experience, but we're picking it up. So potentially the mirror neurons in our brains are firing a little bit more intensely. Certainly this can be really helpful in careers that allow us to engage with other people, to show empathy, to be authentic. In fact, it's the only way we can really operate is just showing up authentically. Otherwise, we get totally overstimulated trying to be someone that we're not. So there's a real gift and a beauty in that passion and compassion. However, if we're in that stimulated state all of the time, if we're not able to separate what's ours from what we're picking up from other people, it can cause a lot of dysfunction, and it can really start to change even our own health, let alone our happiness and our ability to kind of cope in the world. So I see some questions. Thank you all. Let me stop for just a moment, and then I'm going to, keeping an eye on time, I'm going to skip some of this, and I want to get to the recommendations I have in the training techniques, and then I'll come back to more questions if I don't to get all of them. So Kate, with regarding to the genetic snaps, which is an awesome question, there's more research being done on this right now. So I'm going to bypass that for now and let you know that the HSP quiz, the highly sensitive person quiz, is pretty directly correlated with what they're finding in the genetics. So if you go to hsperson.com, you can actually click on the tab that says research, and it will let you know a little bit more about that. It is something I'm looking into because I want to be able to offer that service to my clients. But the funny thing with some of this is we get so excited by like the science and the details, and I want to go get tested. Honestly, there's no question for me. I think there's 24 questions on the quiz. I have all of them. Like many of you, I'm an off-the-chart sensitive. I don't need a genetic test, although there are some other components, like I've done a brain scan that showed this depth of processing, dealing with anxiety, depression, ADD, OCD, all of that. A lot of that is from the sensory overload. So once you start to see the pieces and put it together, it's like totally makes sense, right? So then if you know that, you can train accordingly with that. So I want to encourage you at this point, know that more testing is going to be available, but also trust your intuition, because sensitive people, we know. That is part of this whole thing. It's not that we know because we're wiser than anybody or we have mystical powers. We know because our brains pick up subtle cues in our environment and in our learning experiences and in our interactions with other people. And we tap into that wisdom when we're quiet, when we can actually recharge our own energy. We have access to incredible insight and creativity and innovation and collaboration, all these beautiful skill sets. The challenge is we have to understand this shadow side, that if we're not careful with that, if we don't protect our sensitivity, really embrace it. And let me stop real quick. I'm not saying protect it like go in a dark closet and avoid the world. We protect it by recharging our own battery and prioritizing that, prioritizing self-care, prioritizing social support, making sure people understand. Now, not everybody's going to understand. I don't suggest you walk around with a hat that says, I'm sensitive, leave me alone, but build community with other sensitive people as much as possible. Even just having one caring, compassionate adult. And even with children, they don't need everybody to understand. They need one compassionate, caring adult that says that this sensitivity is really a gift and a blessing. And together, we're going to learn to manage this. I just gave myself goosebumps, by the way, because I think of how many kids and how many of us on this webinar probably could have used that in our lifetimes. So many more questions. I'm going to come back to all of them, and I will stay on for the full hour, but I don't want everybody else to have to stay on for the full hour. So for those of you that want the quicker takeaways, I'm going to start wrapping up with some techniques and some recommendations. And for those of you who want to continue to have a discussion, I love this, so I'll hang out with you as long as you all want to. So let me give you, I'm going to skip straight to the strength, what I call HSP strength training, and then I'm going to give you a particular practice that really helps this. So strength training, meaning how do you use your sensitivity as a strength? I really believe it's kind of a superpower if you really get into this enough and you can really navigate this. But please know that understanding is just the first step. Your nervous system is still hot. It's the way I think of it. Like I still get really easily overstimulated, and I have to really monitor my self-care and my boundaries and other things I'm going to talk about. So rule number one, or kind of technique number one, is really prioritize self-care. We know that we are energetic systems, and sensitive people, we just read that a little bit more strongly, but we can also give that more strongly. Most sensitive people are in positions, in careers or jobs where we're actually helping other people. We actually thrive on meaning and purpose and contribution, and that's a wonderful thing. But if we're not careful, we take on everybody else's stuff. We wear ourselves out. We burn out really quickly. And I believe the majority of burnout comes from this place. This is that hijacked stress relationship. Unfortunately, with a lot of us, it also leads us into substance abuse, which could also include food and bad relationships with food, unhealthy relationships, and I could go on and on about all of the other kind of shadow sides if we're not careful. But I want you to understand that if you are going to be able to help anyone, you have to put your oxygen mask on first. I know you all know that, or you wouldn't be here, but I have to say this again because it is so important. I just saw Chris's question about this is a gift or a blessing, but I don't know what I said. So if it comes back to me, I'll share it again. But I will say that it's a superpower if we learn how to navigate it effectively. I also believe stressing is a blessing if we navigate it effectively. Stress is just energy and information. Sensitive people, we read that more deeply. If we can access that energy and information and mobilize it as something positive in the world, that's the superpower we all need today, right? So, okay, I'm getting ahead of myself. Prioritize self-care. Please, please, please get in a community that helps you to be accountable to doing that. Part of why I'm putting this out there this year and kind of shifting my practice to really, I don't want to say on the side, a lot of my speaking and consulting and research is the same, but really this to me is my community. I want to build a family of people around this idea where we can support each other to then go out into the world and deal with people who really don't get it. I will tell you, in my speaking engagements, the number one question I get afterwards has to do with sensitivity. And many times it's a parent that has a child who's sensitive, and there is so much great work that we can do in this space if we learn how to navigate it. Okay, sorry, soapbox, coming back. Number two, set consistent, healthy boundaries. This is critical, especially with stimulation. We know that stress and stimulation is good for us as long as we have the energy we need to cope. And so be aware that your sensitivity is going to make things like technology, noise, even things that are exciting can be overstimulating. And I said this for such a long time in my own life. I have a wonderful life. I love my work. I go out and I do a speaking engagement, and it's like this massive gaping wound of vulnerability of like, here's me and here's everything I think is important, and I just like lay it out there. And I come back and I'm like for 3 days depressed and I don't know what's going on. And it was so confusing to me because other friends of mine would go speak and they'd get like super excited about it, and they do day after day after day, and I just couldn't do that. Well, it turns out that that sensitivity, picking up the energy of all of the people in the room, and then the hours I would spend after my talks answering questions, deeply engaging with each person, that's the experience I wanted. But that was unsustainable. So I have to choose, if this is what I want to do, that there's boundaries around how often I speak, the length of time that I speak, how far I'll travel, because that's very stimulating to me. Even technology and this, I love doing webinars, but there's only so much I can do with the technology before I start to feel that. So each of us has to get really clear on where those limits are, what those boundaries are that need to be set. Okay, I see the time, we're right at a half an hour. Let me move through these last three fairly quickly, and then I'm going to give you a training technique and some other resources before I answer questions. So number 3 is to oscillate. So similar to setting boundaries, we can go into intensity and passion and compassion and empathy and all those wonderful spaces as long as we recharge. And so even more than non-sensitive people, I would suggest that you try to set up your day with this sort of oscillation. So maybe working for 15 minutes, recharging for 10 minutes. For me, recharging is not just the oscillation, but also the preparation. So meditation, doing what I call the brain recharge meditation, which is just a really simple framework for meditating that I find just helps to make it so simple that you can do it without worrying about all the fancy stuff. I do a brain recharge meditation for 20 to 30 minutes every morning. I do a reflection recharge in the evening. And then throughout the day, I try to get another 5 to 10 minutes at least once. And what that does is start to reprogram our nervous system to still receive those cues and those messages and still have our sensitivity, but not get thrown so far over in that demand capacity ratio. I hope that makes sense. So that recharging and how we prepare and how we recharge during the day is so important. And that's what the 21-day recharge challenge that I'm starting in February, and we're going to keep repeating those, is all about, is actually training your nervous system to utilize energy more effectively through this simple meditation practice. And then once you have that, you start to be able to shift and adjust other things like nutrition and movement and sleep, which are so fundamental to our energy capacity. Also, using your sensitivity as a strength in how you connect with other people and how you contribute to the world. So very quickly, the brain is organized in a hierarchy of processing information. The lowest level that happens first is our capacity. The second level is connection, and the third level is contribution. And so recharging our nervous system that way, we have to learn energy management, oscillation, meditation first. Then we can move to connection and contribution. And I think as sensitive people, we just have to navigate that a little bit more diligently. We just have to say, this is who I am and this is a blessing, and I'm going to train it so that I can use it to my advantage. So number 4, intimate social support. And what I mean by intimate is, as sensitive people, we want to connect deeply. It turns out that sensitive people also get bored in relationships pretty often. I thought that was funny, learning some of that research that Elaine Aron's doing about sensitive people in relationships and romantic relationships. And part of the reason is we want to explore the meaning of life. We want to have deeper connections and relationships. So our romantic relationship doesn't have to bring that, but we do need connection with other people where we're able to have deeper conversations about the meaning of life, which is also why I want to build this community for us to have these conversations. And then number 5, nurture meaning and purpose. So we feel deeply connected to wanting meaning and purpose. So having that through our conversations, having work environments that allow us to tap into that, seeing how we can contribute. And in the brain recharge meditation, I actually walk you through that process of focusing on your breath, focusing on a feeling, focusing on an intention, and kind of shifting. Once you have the capacity and the connection in the brain itself and in the nervous system, now you can open up to possibility of what your meaning and purpose is and how you want to contribute and how you want to serve. So there's a simple formula for how to do that. And again, in the 21-day challenge, I'll teach that. I also have a course, which is Stress Mastery for Highly Sensitive People, which is being developed. So that's actually free to sign up for. And you can get information on all of those by going to ebrain.heidihanna.com. So let me type this in here, ebrain.heidihanna.com, just so you have it. I will be continuing to put out these webinars, but we are building a community there so that you can sign up. We will even have a VIP HSP community for those of you who want to have dialogue about this more often, because I think gathering together is really important. So let me just touch on two last things before I get to questions. The first one is just kind of a call out for anyone in the group that may experience vasovagal syndrome or know someone who does. I'm actually doing research right now looking at the correlation between the sensitivity trait and vasovagal syndrome, which is a fainting, kind of an unexplained fainting. Mine has been anxiety induced. It's not always the case. Sometimes it's a medical vasovagal where you may have a needle reaction. But the more I speak about this, the more people are coming out and telling me that they have had this experience. This syndrome means that it's happened multiple times. And it's a very interesting thing to look at. So I am doing research on that. You can email me if you have that or know someone who does, and I've got a quick assessment that they can take. I also want to share these resources. So as I mentioned, the sensitivity assessment, you can also get that at hsperson.com. You can get the quiz. The only reason I'm giving you my link to the assessment is because we are gathering research. So if you're interested in being connected with that, please do use that link. And all that means is that we're starting to explore some correlations, not only in what happens with sensitive people, but what training techniques are most effective, looking at different meditation experiences, incorporating sensory experiences into meditation, something I call neuroception meditation, which is a term I borrowed from Dr. Stephen Porges, who I love. If you haven't seen my interview with Dr. Porges, I highly recommend you check that out. It's on my YouTube channel. So all of this stuff I'm trying to give you to help support you in your own journey. And on those resources at the ebrain.heidihanna.com, if you sign up for those, you'll know when there are new resources, new 21-day challenges. There is one there that you can sign up for. Also Sensitive, the movie, I mentioned that. So let me just give you one more thing to glance at, and that is that brain recharge process, what we're doing. And I will have this, I'll try to do a video on it soon. This is part of my Stress Mastery curriculum. So if you take the course, you'll learn how to do this. If you do the 21-day challenge, you'll learn how to do this. But I'll try to put out some other videos on this as well. It's a meditative practice, which is also just a brain training practice of calming the nervous system through breath regulation, connecting through a positive feeling, and then focusing, getting clarity on some sort of intention. And many, many meditative practices do this. HeartMath, which is a system that I love, walks through this in a quick coherence technique and some of the other techniques that we use. I'm trained in the HeartMath process. I don't do one-on-one coaching, but we have some amazing coaches in our community. So if you ever want to learn more about HeartMath or work one-on-one with somebody, I can provide that link. But this is a biofeedback device by HeartMath called Inner Balance that I put on. And I do this every morning and afternoon in my brain recharge practice because it gives me some feedback on my iPhone. I actually use some sensory cues. I use music and sound and aromatherapy in my practice. And I can see through the data that I'm getting back what's working well for me. I can also see when I'm getting stuck on something, and it just gives another measurement to kind of help guide me through the process. I also do meditation without a device. I like to go out in nature and meditate, and I certainly think that that's a great option. I've just found for a lot of people that are trying to learn or start a new meditation practice that feedback can be super helpful. And as a sensitive person, I allow myself to be curious about what's working and what's not working, and it really has deepened my own practice. So in the Brain Recharge training tools that I'm putting together, and we'll share with anyone who's interested. Best way to do that is to just sign up for that the community at the eBrain link. I'm going to do some of these shorter practices where I'll guide you through it and also give you some of the tools that I use. So let me just show you one real quickly, and then I promise I'm going to wrap up and get to questions. But this is an example of using sight and sound cues to train breath regulation, and that's that first level of the brain recharge practice, and then we go up through feeling emotion and focusing on some sort of intention. I'm going to mute myself. I'm going to show you this just for 30 seconds, and then I'll be back with you to wrap up and take questions. So I'm actually trying to mute the sound there. I'm not sure if it's working, so let me just pause that and let you know that the intention with that is to coordinate your breath to the rise and fall of the moving breath ball. You can also listen to the sounds, which are cues, and I have certain sections of music that will actually give you a drum beat on each side if you don't like watching the moving breath ball. For me, one of the sensory conditions that I've unfortunately struggled a lot with is motion sickness. So following a moving breath ball is a little intense for me. I choose to actually listen to a guided nudge, but the HeartMath device gives you also prompts like that. And what we're doing there is just training our nervous system to get into this state of coherence or a rhythmic breathing pattern that allows us to settle the nervous system enough to now open up to these positive emotion cues that really start to connect the neurons in the brain and soothe the stress reactions. It puts us into the parasympathetic response. I mean, it's this beautiful cascade that happens. And once we're in that state from a primal part of our brain of kind of calming that stress response, now we can activate insight, clarity, collaboration, all that beautiful stuff in the human part of our brain. So not enough time to go through the whole integrative neuroscience approach here, but in many of our webinars and certainly in the Stress Mastery course, I get into that in more detail. So if you're interested in that, you can check those out there. Okay, you guys, I love you. I'm so grateful that you were here. I'm going to put these resources back. I'm not going anywhere. So for those of you that have questions, I'm going to go back through the questions that have been posed and do my best to answer them. I'm going to take a breath and be okay with the fact that we're running over time. If any of you are feeling a little stressed about time, then it will not hurt my feelings if you have to leave. I want to thank you for being here with me and encourage you to stay connected because I'm going to be providing a lot more resources for you this year. I'm really excited about that. And then let me go back. So if people have questions, you can post those now. I'm going to do my best to keep up with these here. So again, the session is going to be recorded for you, so you can check that out afterwards. We talked a little bit about the genetics. Ooh, I saw something here. I see so many of you have had challenges with this as a child, right? So would it be true to say that neural adaptation and habituation is not happening as much with HSPs, Ekaterina? So I would actually say that neural adaptation is happening more, not less, in HSPs. The challenge with that is that because we are all hardwired for safety and we all have fear circuits in the brain that respond more quickly and more intensely, if you take that and magnify it in the sensitive person, it means that some of those negative bias, I think of it as the lens through which we see the world, that can actually get a bit hijacked into negative so that we may seem less adaptable to positive. But it turns out that we're actually highly adaptable. That's the whole point. But if we've experienced challenges, especially with perceptions of safety, either through developmental trauma in our childhood or acute trauma that happens later in life, because we're so adaptable, those negative patterns get hardwired or embodied even more intensely, so they can feel like they're more difficult to adapt. But with our sensitivity, we can use sensory cues that actually we adapt to more quickly. I think that's why, like this brain recharge practice, we can really utilize aromatherapy and sound and movement and touch and all sorts of things. I love hot water, moving water, hot tubs, and stretching in that while I'm doing my meditation. That can actually really alleviate some of that negative hijack that we're feeling, but we have to continue to work on that. So knowing that that sensitive can adapt us negatively really quickly if we're not careful, especially in today's world, which is throwing a lot of information that's very stimulating and very stressful. Another thing I'll just share, I happen to be a big fan of Marianne Williamson's work, and she has a book called From Tears to Triumph, and I found it fascinating because, you know, she talked about the fact that if you're paying attention today, you should probably be a little depressed. As sensitive people, most of us have a sense of depression regarding the state of our world, and I don't think that's just today. It's nothing necessarily political. I'm not trying to make any big statements here. I'm just saying that there's a lot of pain in the world. And so if you're sensitive to that, it can feel really overwhelming. And to medicate our way out of that is not the best approach. I believe the best approach is to recharge our energy regularly so that we can get to a state where our nervous system is being used to our advantage, that we can embrace what's beautiful and wonderful and creative and sensitive and artistic and moving, deeply moving and towards positive, while also seeing that there are challenges in life too, because our relationship with stress, remember, is based on demand versus capacity. So yes, there's demand out there and there's a lot of stimulation and a lot of stress, but we can be more resourceful by using our sensitivity to really nourish the beautiful sides of what makes us human. And I suggest that for everybody. You don't have to be sensitive to do that. It's just that as sensitive people, we have some of these abilities to use sensory cues to adapt a little bit more quickly. It's also why I want to work with more sensitive people, because I feel like there's also a willingness to go there with sensitive people and to want to have those conversations. So I hope that that's helpful. Yeah, Katerina is talking about digital technology. I agree with you, blaming technology on increased sensitivity. I think this is one of those areas we just really have to be careful at setting healthy boundaries. It's not just the technology itself. We know that there's a vibration and an energy that technology puts off into the environment that will affect sensitive people, but also the information being carried by technology. So when we use technology to gather together and have conversations and feel supported, it's wonderful that we have that. We still can't do too much of it. For me, the lights and all of that stuff is still stimulating. So after this, I'm going to need to take a break, close my eyes, meditate, have a healthy snack, maybe go outside in nature. So we rebalance. But it's that rebalancing, recharging process that's so important. And technology isn't going anywhere. So I think it's important that we recognize our own limitations with that, set those boundaries, and then create patterns in our day that best support that. Knowing how much time is too much time, and certainly with children being very aware of that, because I do think that, you know, kids' brains are so plastic and malleable and adaptable, especially if they're sensitive, but all children are being impacted by too much technology, and it's something we all need to work on together. Let me scroll down here. We've got some more questions. Scroll, there we go. Krista asks about seasonal fluctuation. I definitely do think so. I think that's another one of those things, seasonal affective disorder, which I believe that I had and didn't know what it was caused by. But if we are more affected by lights and sounds and temperature and environment, it would definitely make sense that we would be more impacted by that. I haven't seen the correlation, so I don't know if it's, you know, super clear. So much of Elaine's work, she does something and then she looks at the research and it's like, ironically, it's 20%, you know, like this seems to be telling us something. I don't know that deeply. I just know through personal experience and conversations with other sensitive people that does seem to. Jim Porter, how are you? I do know about fainting goats. Great to see you here. And I've had several people actually send me that video because many of you also know I love humor. I don't know if it's funny or not, but let me just share. So these goats that faint, I think when they're scared. But it reminds me of Stephen Porges's work again on the polyvagal theory. Simply put, you guys, we have in our nervous system vagus nerve that actually has kind of two sections to it. So there's a myelinated and unmyelinated. One is above the diaphragm, one is below. Long story short, if you look at evolution, a lot of the different mammalian species have this freeze or faint response. And I had planned to talk about that today because that ultimately is what I'm seeing as that correlation with vasovagal syndrome or syncope. So that stress response, if we have, kind of in our initial, I'll go ahead and pull this up here. This is all stuff I teach in the stress mastery course, but let me get to this. We talk about the fight or flight response as being a stress response. And I really want you to understand that's not a response, it's a reaction. Reactions are what happen in the primal part of the brain. Responses are what happen in our more logical thinking human part of the brain. So this is a stress reaction, fight or flight. We actually have at least 6 different reactions based on different hormones that our body produces. Fight or flight, freeze or faint, tend or befriend. Fight or flight are more adrenaline-based, freeze or faint are more cortisol-based, tend and befriend are more oxytocin and estrogen-based. So really fascinating looking at all of that. The freeze or faint reaction seems to be more of a chronic stress response or a heightened sensitivity to potential threats. So in my own personal journey, my stomach problem started at around the age of 10. My panic attack started when I was 12. My syncope, so I started fainting when I was about between 12 and 14. There was a very clear pattern to all of this with that vagus nerve, which is connected in the gut. So a lot of chronic fatigue, but also irritable bowel, digestive problems is happening as part of this freeze or faint response, a reaction, which is really like a death reaction. Dr. Porges talks about it that way. So animals like mice, for example, if they're really being attacked, they play dead. And we can see this in some humans that have this overreactive nervous system that I believe happens with HSPs when they're taught to minimize or ignore their sensory experiences, and we start to embody that actually kind of gets stuck in our body. Bessel van der Kolk's book, The Body Keeps the Score, explains a lot of this stuff. So I think when we understand that, then we can learn how to navigate that more effectively. And a big piece of that is appreciating our stress reactions, understanding our unique relationship with stress. Again, that's based on the load, which is demand versus capacity, the lens, which has to do with our sensitivity or negativity bias, and the signature, which is how it manifests itself. And all of those are adaptable if we use the right training protocol to reprogram. And I do that by assessing each situation, appreciating those stress reactions and understanding and learning from them, and then making those adjustments. So it's a simple formula. It just takes practice and conditioning, just like conditioning a muscle or conditioning a mental skill set to be able to use stress as fuel for good. And I believe that that's possible. In fact, I think it's the only way to cure stress and our stress epidemic is not to minimize or manage it, but learn from it, take the energy and information and do something with it, because stress mobilized is just energy. Stress minimized is anxiety. I hope that makes sense. I feel like I'm on a little bit of a soapbox, but I'm doing a TED Talk on this in a little over a month. So I'm still fleshing all of this content out, and I feel like I'm flushing through all of it with you. Let's see. Lisa asks about sensitivity inborn versus a learned response. That's a great question. And the only thing I could really think of other than, I would say genetics, we might be able to look at that. But if you look at Bruce Lipton's work on the biology of belief, which I've been kind of obsessing on lately, we know that genes are just a code, and whether or not they're activated obviously is based by lifestyle. So there is that nature-nurture interaction. The easiest way I can think of is what's showing up in childhood. So for me, I actually went back and I asked my mom what I was like as a child, and it turned out I threw a fit, a temper tantrum at fireworks shows. I hated fireworks, I hated loud noise, I hated the bright lights. There were some cues early on that, from a sensory perspective, I was being overwhelmed pretty easily. That deep emotion, the crying, even being drawn to music and the arts. And so when I'm working with parents, I usually ask them questions about that before the child even knows how to express themselves. Are you seeing some of these reactions? They may be more highly reactive, versus developing maybe sensitivities based on traumas that we've had. And certainly the combination of the two gives us this really kind of powerful situation of anxiety. So really interesting. And Lisa, I'm sure you'll find all of this research fascinating. I would definitely recommend, if you haven't yet, to read the polyvagal theory. I see here that Claire mentioned reading that too, which is awesome. I mean, it's so good. And there's a little pocket guide. I actually just have this next to me here. The pocket guide to the polyvagal theory. Some of this stuff is, it's been around for a really long time, but we're not communicating it well. And so one of my goals with the Stress Mastery community is not to put out more content, but to be a curator of content and hopefully to communicate it with you all in a way that you can simplify it to apply it. So I am doing another Global Stress Summit in April, same sort of idea. In fact, we're not going to be doing a lot of new lecture content, but taking existing content that's out there and putting it into a framework where you can learn it and apply it more effectively. So I'm going to be talking with some of the experts about the specific techniques and recommendations they have, rather than having them explain the concepts, because there's so much of that out there already that we can just share with each other. So again, for those of you who want to take the 21-day course, that'd be awesome. Love the heart math stuff, life-changing, right? So I know we have several people here who are practitioners and coaches. Love, 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 and there's great resources at heartmath.com. Also heartmath.org if you want to see more of the research on heart rate variability and some of the training techniques. So lots of stuff out there. Okay, I'm not sure I got to all of your questions, but hopefully I got, oh, there's some more. Sorry, I couldn't quite get down there. Introverts and HSPs. So Ellen, I will tell you that Elaine Aaron has mentioned that there is somewhat of a correlation, but I think it's a behavioral correlation. So it turns out that, I want to say it's like 65 or 70% of HSPs are introverts, but at least 30 to 35. I don't know if my numbers are right. I'm really not good at math, but a big portion are extroverts. So very interesting if you look at what that really means and how we get energy through that. I tested as an extrovert early in life, but I think I was lying based on what people were telling me I was. Like, oh, you're so outgoing and you're so this and you're so that. And it turns out I'm totally an introvert based on how I kind of recharge my own energy in quiet. So really interesting stuff, and I would recommend, again, looking at some of Elaine Aaron's stuff. In our Stress Mastery course online, I do have some of her lectures, which are brilliant. You can go to YouTube and just Google Elaine Aaron, and she's got a 3-part series, which is phenomenal. I watch it over and over and over. Jim Porter, Kelly McGonigal's TED Talk, and then I'm going to start wrapping up, you guys. I'm so sorry. I'm going to try to get to this the best I can. Okay, pocket guide is Stephen Porges. Stephen Porges, look up polyvagal theory. You can also go on YouTube and look up Stephen Porges, Heidi Hanna, and you'll see an interview I did with him, which was so much fun and awesome. Love, love, love his work. And it just, him and Bessel van der Kolk and so many of these brilliant people, Bruce McEwen's work, just incredible. So, Jim, back to the Kelly McGonigal talk. I'll say this as I'm preparing to do my TED Talk. I think Kelly McGonigal's work is amazing, and I love that she's teaching us about the upside of stress. I have her book. I think it's fascinating. And the whole time I tend to listen to these types of talks, I feel like we're missing the most important part of making this practical, which is how do we access the upside of stress? So we know that research shows that people that have a lot of stress, but also perceive it as positive, have more benefits from that. We know that people that have more stress tend to see their lives as having more meaning. So there's all these really interesting kind of research correlations about stress being good for us, and we know that. But we also know, and I know you know so well, the pressure performance curve, that there's a bell curve and there's a tipping point where pressure starts to negatively impact our performance. And what I'm so fascinated with is, why is it that this much pressure can like totally freak me out and make me want to stay in bed for 3 weeks, and this much pressure doesn't affect my husband, which sounds so weird to say because I almost said fiance, but husband. Totally another story. And by the way, great dynamic about sensitive people in relationships. Boy, have I learned a lot. Thought I would never get married because I'm so sensitive. And it turns out that having a person in your life who understands, not only understands, but appreciates it, sees the value of sensitivity, it's the greatest gift. And I think it's the biggest life changer of all. So we don't all have that in our romantic relationships, but we can certainly be that for each other and with each other. So I believe stress mobilized is energy potential that we can use in the service of positive change. That's why I say stressing is a blessing, because I believe if we understand it and use it as it's intended, it helps to facilitate positive change and growth and the upside of stress. But we have to understand it, and we have to know our own unique relationship with stress, understanding that it's very different for all of us based on that lens through which we see our world, and HSP is a huge component of all of that. All right, it's been an hour. I've gone past my boundary of self-regulation, but I'm going to do even more self-care when I wrap up this session. I'm going to go meditate and get some fresh air and have a nice healthy lunch. And I will think of all of you and hope that this has been a blessing to you. I love this work and I want to do more of this. And so if it's helpful for you, definitely join the community. I'm still trying to figure out exactly how to give the best programming there, but there is a free stress mastery for highly sensitive people being built, so you can sign up for that now. There's also the 21-day challenge, which is $21 for 21 days. If you can't afford it, email me and I'll give you a free code. I'm trying to raise a little bit of money just to pay for the platform, and figure out some way that I can keep providing all of these free resources, but I trust that it will come. And my new Stress Mastery online course is coming out in March as a soft launch, and it's going to be really exciting. So with that, let's wrap up for today. And you know what? I will post the link. It will be on my YouTube channel, the full recording, which always feels a little vulnerable because now it's like I'm putting it out there to the world, but I'll make sure that you all can access that. And next month, the Stress Mastery webinar, we're actually going to be talking about social connection. I'm hoping to have my friend Bruce McEwen on with me to talk about this amazing new research looking at cortisol and oxytocin, and I think everybody needs to know about it. We all know that social support is important, but when you see what it does at this neurological and biochemistry level, it's fascinating. So with that, be part of our community if you want more of this. And great to see you all. Thanks for being here. Sending you lots of love, and I will see you next time. Okay, closing the presentation. Bye.